Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. Today I'll be reviewing The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So this movie is the newest adaptation of Bram Stoker's work, Dracula. It takes place in just kind of one chapter of the Dracula story, but they expand it out into a full-length film. And I will say that's probably the biggest drawback of the movie. It does feel overly extended. It takes a while to get going, but when it gets going, I think it really does accomplish what it's trying to do, and it's a really fun and enjoyable movie. But when it takes a while to get there, and it feels like some exposition's kind of thrown in, and it just feels like it's kind of stretched a little too thin at times, and the script suffers a little bit from that. That's probably my biggest knock. So basically, the premise of the story is you have Dracula being transported from Romania to England on an 1800s shipping vessel, and he gets loose and he's taking out the crew one by one in gruesome ways. And speaking of gruesome, both the visual effects, having them be practical and CGI, I think worked pretty well. Obviously, I love practical horror effects. I think that really helps elevate a film, and I think they look good when they use them. But the CGI moments didn't look bad because it takes place almost entirely when Dracula is on the screen at night and it's stormy and he's like off in the shadows, and the action all takes place in kind of this wild storm. So it helps cover up any kind of blemishes of that CGI. But I do think the movie where it excels the most is the overall atmosphere and aesthetic of it taking place on this ship in these stormy nights, having really good set pieces taking place in the bowels of the ship or actually on top. It never feels like you're watching a movie that's filmed on a green screen. It feels very lived in. It feels like the lore and these characters, you're right there with them. Speaking of which, they use a lot of kind of POV shots where you feel like you're stalking the crew as Dracula, which I feel helps add to the tension. And on top of that, there's a lot of kind of camera movement that's moving back and forth, like you feel like the ship is moving, and they utilize that really well. It kind of creates an uneasiness about it. The movie has kind of a claustrophobic nature to it because you're trapped on this ship with this monster stalking the crew. I think the performances were pretty solid from everyone involved. I think that Liam Cunningham, who many people may know as the Onion Knight from Game of Thrones, who plays the captain in this film, I think he has the most depth to his character. Some of the characters are kind of just stereotypical sailors of the time. They don't really feel like they add a lot. They're kind of like fodder for Dracula. But I do think he has one of the deeper arcs as a character, and having his experience with his grandson and everything that goes on with him in the film, I think helps elevate it. He probably gives the most emotional performance of anyone. Corey Hawkins, who plays our main character Clemens, I think also does a very serviceable job helping move the story along. He again has some depth like the captain, so it's someone you can root for and someone you can follow along. There is a plot point in this movie that pushes towards the idea of race and his struggle as a character, and I would have liked to see that explored more. This movie is almost 2 hours long, and we only really get maybe like 3 to 4 minutes of that exposition of him talking about his struggles as a character. So I would have liked to see that a little bit more thrown in rather than kind of just being towards the end of the film. I would have liked to have more of an experience with him as a character. Javier Botet plays Dracula in the movie, and I think he does a great job when he's just so menacing and creepy. I always have to applaud actors that can play an iconic monster, an iconic horror icon, and do it well, and I think he does a really solid job. I would love to see more from him in particular. The end of the movie, without going into too many spoilers, does have kind of like a cliffhanger that could maybe set up other movies. I don't know how successful this film will be, or will we get those future installments of Dracula and everything that goes along with it in the Bram Stoker stories, but I don't know. It's just strange that they set it up that way because it seems like he could be such a cool character as he's progressing in the film, or watching him change and metamorphosize as like kind of a Dracula that's barely alive. At one point in the beginning of the movie, he's like struggling to do anything. He's just barely getting by. And by the end of the film, we see this very powerful creature, and then things kind of change as we get further along. So I'd love to see that progression more. I just don't know if we will. I had touched on the overall production design of the ship itself. I think when they're in the interiors and you feel like you are in that practical set, it works really well. It adds to the atmosphere, the creepiness, the authenticity of it. So I liked when they did that. When they try to integrate some more CGI shots or wide shots of the ship, it takes me out of it just a little bit, but I didn't think it was ever egregiously bad. I think horror fans will find something to enjoy in this one. It isn't overly gruesome to where general audiences couldn't go and enjoy it. It's not something like Terrifier or Evil Dead or something like that where it's so graphic and in your face that general audiences might be turned off by it. It is intense at times. I think there's enough gore and gruesomeness for horror audiences, but general audiences could still enjoy it for kind of the thriller elements of it, the suspense, and the overall production and atmosphere of this movie. So I think it could appeal to both audiences. So overall, if I were to rate The Last Voyage of the Demeter, I would actually give it a 7 out of 10. It was a lot better than I thought it was going to be, with not seeing very many reviews coming into it, kind of having it kind of fly under the radar with all these other big movies going around. I will say the pacing is a bit of an issue, and I think the lack of an really fleshed out script will hurt it in kind of its runtime, because I think some people, particularly in the beginning and some lulls in the movie, may find it a little slow or a little dull. But I think the overall look of the film, the performances, and everything that comes together to create this unique Dracula story is worth checking out. So if you check out The Last Voyage of the Demeter, let me know what you thought about it. Did you like it as much as me? Did you like it less? I'll have to admit, I'm a sucker for these like period piece horror movies. I love the combination of taking these historical periods and putting a creature into it and just kind of adding to just your traditional story. What some of my favorite films are, the Pirates of the Caribbean films, Master and Commander. It felt like it's taking those, like 30 Days a Night, it's taking those things and kind of putting them all together in a mishmash nature. So I personally enjoyed it. I just don't know how it worked for everyone. So again, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you guys next time.